Hello. So, I want to talk today about goals, how we set them, why we set them, how we find them, and what allows us to achieve them. So, I don't know what your goals and your obstacles are. So, I'm just going to tell you what I know from my perspective. I have set a goal. What I know about goal setting from reading Johan Hari's book on stolen focus is that the best goals are just a little bit difficult, just just out of your reach, but attainable. Just just there. You just have to step it up a little bit and you're there. Those are the best kind of goals to set for yourself, to create an environment for flow states. So I set a goal for myself a couple years ago when I had this experience of trying to describe it and trying to use it for a purpose I determine. See, when somebody sets a goal, when you set a goal, when I set a goal, even if you have selected it perfectly to fit into the parameters that, for me, Johan Hari helped describe, you're going to have obstacles. If they are a little bit difficult, if they are a little bit out of reach, then there is something slowing you down or stopping you from attaining that goal. What I want you to understand about achieving goals is that once you identify those things, all right, so let's go through the whole process. Like, I have set an environment where I can reflect and determine what kind of person I want to be. I have set an environment where I can eliminate distractions and focus on what it is I want to improve about myself. Once I have created that environment and begun that work, I can select the parameters for the goals I want to achieve. Once I have done that work, I can select the goals. One of my goals is to be able to do this work as my job, which means, well, it doesn't matter what it means, but that's the goal, right? What I found was, because I've been doing this now for about 3 years, something like that. The event was about 4 years ago, and I couldn't communicate anything at first, so I started to. They say when you want to be happy, you should find what makes you happy and make that your career, your life, your work. So the first step I did was design my work. This, this, right here. But I didn't really actively pursue it because I've lived my life in such a way that I had incredibly bad habits that were all in my way, and I did not understand that. I just thought, well, I'm doing the work. Eventually, if it's meant to be, something will happen with the work. Things like that happen all the time. Why not? But when you really start to do the work and get that fantastical thinking out of your process, you'll recognize that you have habits that are in your way. And I want to talk about 3 habits for me personally that were in the way or are in the way of me achieving these goals so that I can illustrate for you what it takes to succeed at achieving goals, setting proper goals and achieving them. So for 3.5 years or so, however long I've been doing this, I would make a talk maybe once a month, maybe once every other month. I would. There are times, like today, I sat down in front of my camera, lights, camera, everything is ready to go, and I thought I had my talk. My talk is all laid out in front of me right here, but I don't have the introduction. I don't know how I want to start to communicate. And I sat here in a flow state, mind wandering away, and I think it took me about 35 minutes to actually get started. And this is the introduction I came up with. But one of the things keeping me in that state, when you start to study meditation and productive mind wandering, flow, and focus, you start to recognize things I haven't talked about in a while called tail chasing, mental tail chasing. Things that are you are constantly repeating in your mind that are keeping you driven. If you are just, maybe it's for you, maybe it's sports, for you, maybe it's cars, whatever the hell it is. For me, it was gambling and gaming constantly in my mind. And I game in strategy games. So there's plenty to distract yourself with because you want to make your plan, you want to be successful, you want to be freaking whatever the hell you want to be. And the gambling aspect to that is that nowadays when we game, a lot of us game on our phones. And almost, I think every game I've seen in the last couple of years anyway, has what we call packs. Like you are doing something, you are trying to achieve something. Hey, this will make it easier. Just spend $30. And they are persistent. They're constantly there. Once AI is a part of it, once you like burn up all you know what I mean? You burn up a resource and it'll be like, bang, here's a pack. I mean, they already do that, but it's going to get a lot more streamlined here pretty quick. That is what I mean by gaming and gambling. Those things combined were an enormous distraction for me. And then about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I decided it was time to take this seriously. I recognized those as obstacles, as things that were stopping me from achieving my goal. And I decided to sacrifice them. Now, I use the term sacrifice very deliberately. I am an idealist. I am mind before matter. I believe in God. And one of the things that always kept me from understanding how the primary source of God's word in this iteration of consciousness, the Bible, how it had all of these things about sacrifice. It made no sense to me that a higher intelligence like that would choose that modality to interact with our species. I did not understand sacrifice until I began to utilize it as a tool. I gave up gaming and gambling. I haven't bought a pack or been in a game that would sell me a pack for however long, month and a half, 2 months. And I am now starting to achieve the initial stages of that goal I set for myself to make this my day job, to make this my work. I think it's important to see it as a sacrifice, to interact with the thing that is stopping you as a sacrifice. That's a very easy illustration for me because that was an enormous thing in my life. And when it comes to achieving goals, one of the most important things for us to do to keep motivated towards achieving those goals is to recognize growth when it shows itself. Let me try to illustrate how that works. When I sacrificed gambling and gaming to try and work on and achieve my goals, what happened was, and I only realized this today, really, just a little while ago in meditation for this talk, what happens is when you do that and you give it some time, something will fill that void. For me, it was an enormous void that I created. Getting rid of that gambling and gaming, that was an enormous void. What filled that void for me was creativity. What changed about my work here is that my focus shifted from these. That doesn't matter. What I'm trying to illustrate is how to achieve the goal. What you need to recognize then, if you make a sacrifice like that and give it some time to simmer in your consciousness, in your mind, suddenly you will recognize the thing that filled that void. If the thing that filled that void is better, gets you closer to achieving your goals, you need to recognize that as progress. If the thing that filled that void is just another version of the same thing, Let's say I started sports gambling and I really cared about athletes and stats or something instead of gaming and gambling the way I have done traditionally, classically, whatever. If the thing I use to fill the void of the thing I sacrificed is just another version of the same thing, you're not really making progress. I can't be judgmental about it. Maybe in some way you are, but I think the likeliness of that is low. But what filled the void for me was all of this increased focus and concentration and the structuring of the kind of work I want to do. To recognize that is growth. To recognize things like that keeps you motivated to continue to achieve your goals. Because when you're doing what I'm doing, all of your time is spent in like meditation, reflection, trying to achieve productive mind wandering, which leads to focus and flow. You can really easily distract yourself and get discouraged. Because some days you just feel mean. Some days you just are unsatisfied. And those days can really slow you down. When you get slowed down like that, it's very helpful to have something to lean on that says, but look, there is growth. There is a process I am undergoing that I can recognize, and it is headed in the direction I have chosen for my life. I can't tell you how important that is to have. And it's not something that is unique to me. It's any of us can do this. I'm not special. I'm not unique in any way. You can do this. I can do it. I don't want to hold a seminar to explain it to you. I want to share it with you and move on. I don't want to sell you merchandise or any of that crap. I think we live in a time of extraordinary opportunity. And I think we live in a time where it has never been easier to completely miss that. Like the world I live in and the news and algorithms I am subjected to can easily convince me that this is a time where all opportunity is ending, when I think the exact reverse is true. I also talk about how one of the gifts we were given, the longest historically recorded work done in our species to advance our mind was done by a creator God, took 1,500 years to do, was really hard to recognize but the goal of that creator's work was to give empathy to our species. Now, just keep that in mind for a second. When we talk about how this world is changing, we've talked about things like this before, like such and such is going to ruin our economy and take all these jobs. Well, that always happens, and then such and such replaces those jobs with new jobs. Okay, let's just say for a minute that that's possibly true of this change as well. What jobs will this new change in society create? And one of them occurs to me. AI prompting is a job that I don't even think that was a term until a couple years ago. Will be a job going forward in this new world we're building right now, or that will be built for us. I'm trying to think of AI prompting as a potential job that is on the horizon for our society. Now, think of somebody trained in empathy to understand what it is you're looking for to get out of your artificial intelligence, to try to understand how the AI will understand and meet that request. Try to think of somebody trained to do that job, but trained with empathy. Especially when we plan to use AI and robotics to change our world into a world of plenty, which they are all promising us. Of course, AI won't doom us. I mean, we worry about it, but not enough to stop building it. So we really hope that it will lead to this world of great plenty and promise. Well, think now. A lot of that is going to do with how the people using the tools will prompt these tools. AI prompting will actually be a job, probably. Think of somebody who does it who is trained in empathy when you are trying to build a world of progress and plenty, the growth of human mind, the growth of consciousness, a world that promotes that while not having to worry about the bare necessities that we've had to worry about my whole life and the whole life of my ancestors before me. Now think, hopefully you've achieved a vision of what somebody utilizing or working in that role would do with empathy as part of their training. And understand that the reverse could also be true, that there will be people operating in those roles who are operating under a principle of forget empathy. Empathy is a vulnerability. Empathy is a weakness. Empathy is something to be exploited. Because if there will be people like an idealist like me can envision, there will be its opposite. But that's a job that we didn't even have a description or a conceptualization for until a couple years ago. The world is changing. Society is changing. We can meet or set goals to achieve a better society as opposed to the doomsday that a lot of us are expecting. So think about, this is a goal I am trying to achieve. I have made a sacrifice in order to achieve it better or increase my odds of achieving it, or when I achieve it, increase the likelihood of good results. And I've thought about it as sacrifice. This is a process that humans go through when they have decided to make a change. This is the process you will go through if you decide to make a change. It will look different than mine will. You will have different problems to overcome. You have different needs you have to fulfill while you do it. But this is just broken down at its core. This is the process. Well, I'm about 20 minutes in. Let me see if I'm missing anything here before I move on to this next one. I guess before I move on to this next sacrifice or potential sacrifice, I want you to understand that the connections I am making, the visions I'm having, see, my work changed once I've made that sacrifice and I've decided and I made a plan. I have chosen I want to use AI to utilize and increase the quality and reach of this work. And since that sacrifice, there have been understandings that I have come to. There are things I understand now that I couldn't have understood had I not opened up that space by sacrificing that thing. I opened up this space and allowed understanding and connections to happen. None of that is possible. Well, possible in the long term. If you look at probability, the way a mind works, my mind is geared in a certain direction. It's likely that I probably would have come to these understandings. But to have the time to compress that process down into just mere months, as opposed to some of us live our whole lives, 80 years, and only have that one connection, that one understanding. And because we don't have any others, that's the guiding principle we use for our lives. None of this compression, none of these understandings and connections are possible without that sacrifice. All right, I decided to stick with the G's. Gambling and gaming. And now I'm going to talk about girls. Because girls are, without a doubt, especially most of the people who watch my stuff are guys. And for guys, a lot of the distraction in this world is girls. Certainly has been my experience. Now, I am not there. I am not ready to sacrifice girls. I think I've come to a point where I'm willing to make a short term sacrifice, but I'm not willing to give up my long term idealism of love and romance, partnership and growth. I think I'm willing to make a short term sacrifice in other words, just stop exposing myself to the pursuit. I understand that this is a privileged position I'm talking from here because I don't interact with many women when it comes to work. I certainly don't interact with any women or anybody else at all when I'm out in public, like doing my shopping, and everything else is geared to isolation. So it's a privileged position. There's not like, well, I'm going to be tempted a lot. I'm not. There's like no temptation whatsoever, because I've made it so. So I know it's a privileged position. And I want to kind of be honest. I want to be honest, but I want to kind of be sensitive. It's hard to do this subject. Well, at least what I came up with in this meditation about this subject, without being a little bit crude. I'm 20 minutes in. Most people have clicked off by now. My retention rate isn't this good. So it's a little bit safer to be a little bit crude. All right, so for most of my life, what I've understood about men and women in the dating is there have been a lot of guys who, yeah, they've got a job. Yeah, they've got a car. Yeah, they've got interests. They've got this, they've got that. They've got these things to offer. But mostly what they've got to offer is that dick. That's pretty much, once you get past all the standard societal stuff, that's pretty much what they have to offer. And I think if asked the question, a lot of girls in my generation would say, yeah, that's been their experience too. But what's happened, see, I used to consider myself a feminist. I used to think, yeah, they should have equal rights. Yeah, they should have equal pay. Well, they do. That's pretty much the case now. And you can find a million talking heads illustrating that far more brilliantly than I can. But a side effect of that seems to be that there is a large number of females now walking around with that same mentality that, yeah, I've got a job. Yeah, I've got a house. Yeah, I like cats. Yeah, I love wine. But really what I've got is that pussy. I know it's crude. I apologize for that crudeness, but it kind of illustrates the point, doesn't it? And I think that's the thing that's probably convincing more than anything else that maybe I've been a feminist long enough. You know what I mean? Once the girls start walking around with that same mentality as the guys I've grown up with, but for you guys too, for the guys listening to this, look, if all you are looking for is that pussy, if that's it, then you aren't meeting crazy girls. That's not what's happening. You are meeting people. That's what it looks like to get exactly what you're looking for. If all you're looking for is that pussy, then you are going to get only girls that have only that to offer. And that has been, I don't know, would you say that's been an average way dating has gone for the last 47, 49 years? A lot of guys are only looking for that. And I would say feminism has helped raise the supply to that demand. And in doing so, you aren't finding crazy girls. You are finding girls who have risen to meet that demand. And this is what that looks like. All the talking heads out there, from whatever to, there's plenty of talking heads that will tell you about this disparity. They will try to make you understand. They're not very gentle about it either. And maybe they shouldn't be. Historically speaking, they haven't exactly been gentle on the guys either. Like guys that walked around with that attitude. we haven't been gentle towards them. So maybe we shouldn't be gentle towards the girls who have adopted that pursuit, that modality, that way of being, that way of what you have to offer. Yeah, I don't think I met a crazy girl. I think I met somebody that is the mimetic path that led there. I mean, and again, I don't think, because this isn't a new problem for me. This isn't like, oh, geez, that was really rough, that last one. I don't know. This has been a problem. And making that connection, understanding that, I look back and I think, because I really know I've had some really good pussy. I know that's terrible. I'm trying not to be crass and crude about it, and I think the connection I've made there is that I don't think I've ever had it with somebody with that mentality. I have pointed out before that the way sex is changing in our society is leading to an awful lot of bad sex. I think this is one of those factors. I think this is why. Because when I reflect on the girls that were really good, they weren't sluts. They had more to offer than that. I mean, they loved to offer that. They were totally in. They were totally down. That was something they loved too. But they weren't what I've been discussing. It wasn't that focus, you know? And that too, that connection, that understanding, that doesn't happen without the sacrifice, without the expanded range of things to think about, of space to think about those things. Sorry if it was crude. I'm going to just see if I'm missing anything. And also, I know that there are a lot of guys out there who, like me, isolate themselves. Here's the further connection to that. I'm pretty isolated. It is not easy to get at me. And one of the few remaining pathways to get at me was sexually. And now that this connection is made, I understand for me that by having all other pathways closed off to get to me, and having that one narrow, and on my part, reluctant pathway, like, it's only open because I desperately want that. You know what I mean? By having it be the only pathway to me, what do you think is going to walk down that path? What is most likely to walk down that path? So for you guys that are isolating yourself because you want to reflect, because you just are sick of crazy, the world is pretty freaking crazy. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. But if you're isolating yourself, and that is your only pathway to you, and the only thing coming down that pathway to you, you perceive as, fuck, another crazy one, understand why that might be happening. All right, so this talk has pretty much ended. One of the processes I'm trying to utilize or integrate into my work is that at the end of the talk, it says in my notes, begin play. And that's exactly what was on the last talk I gave. Begin play. And for this one, I wanted to illustrate some of the goals. Why is it important to me that I utilize AI for this work? And how has that changed how the work will look going forward? I realize that I'm moving slow. There were some pretty big things to overcome here to achieve this first goal. And for most of you, probably it wouldn't even mean anything. Like, the thing I'm trying to overcome is like so simple for most of you. But that process was important for me to go through. The understanding of getting rid of that instant gratification of dopamine hits from gambling and gaming, stuff like that if I were to be successful, it is important to have under control. That process is crucial. So it may be taking me a little while. You may still be looking at my kitchen, but Let me show you a little bit of plus it's also important to note, especially since I work so much on consciousness as a topic. My meditations have changed. The structure of my outlines has changed because I am envisioning doing these talks and these projects utilizing AI. And I'm about to give you some examples, and I want you to understand how mind works first. I tell you the definition of consciousness, it's a process leading to mind. When most people think about what they would like to achieve, they attach a certain personal ownership to their ideals, to their ideas. The way mind works is you go through the organic process. You either are driven or you're fueled, and it leads to your mind, and there's something in your mind. But all of those things that drove or fueled you are also in multiple minds at the same time, because multiple people are exposed to the same things that are driving or fueling you. So if I come to an understanding, the odds are very good that that understanding is in many, many minds, because many other minds have been exposed to the same fuel or the same drives that I have been. And I want you to understand one of the memes that I would like you to get rid of. There's this meme that's like, never tell anybody how you're going to move, right? It's got that sort of flavor of, well, if you tell them how you're going to move, they're going to undercut you and take your advantage away because you've given it to them. And I understand that. But that meme, and I want you to understand, look, I call it a meme. What I've just described to you, I call a meme. Look at the mimetic nature of advice, because that's really what that meme is. Don't tell anybody how you move, because the fear is they'll take and subvert you, right? That is advice that is replicated in culture. That is mimetic. When I tell you it's an organic process, mimetically driven or fueled, that is an example of how you are mimetically driven or fueled, just by that little, don't tell anybody how you're going to move. The mimetic nature of advice. All right, so first, one of my first goals, I've got one of the people I really love their contribution to consciousness is Neil deGrasse Tyson. And one of the things that has happened recently in his area of expertise is that Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 have left our immediate solar system. They haven't left our solar system, but what most people conceptualize, and maybe even a little bit bigger than most people conceptualize, is our solar system. And what they found and then confirmed, and this may be complete BS, trusting news sources these days is a tricky business. But what I think they have found is that at the edge of our solar system, there is this wall of fire that we will need to be able to navigate if we ever want to leave this solar system in body. Now, I could ask the question. I'm going to just illustrate the question. I'm just going to give it away. Maybe Neil will even answer it. But if I was doing this process, when I do the meditation on it, how to ask the question, see, our solar system is a sun, and all these things rotating around that sun via gravity, right? But that solar system, that sun, is flying through the galaxy. That galaxy is flying through a universe, right? To say it is one thing. To illustrate it with actual math that is known is different. What I would like to know is, what directionality do we use for Voyager 1 and 2? If our solar system is moving, our Earth is at a point and moving, what direction did we send them in? Did we send them in roughly the same direction? I know they had goals to achieve on their way, but did one end up far west and one end up far right? I know that that is very basic, and I could illustrate it so much better if I was using AI, but because I'd like to know, is that wall of fire in advance of? Is it the tail end of our movement through the solar system, or through the galaxy? Is it on the side? Is it out of the plane of ecliptic? What I have questions about that, because if they are relatively unidirectional, would we have a chance of finding more data if we went a different way? And maybe I just don't properly understand the math. But that's an example of, see, normally I would just do what I just did, right? And it's rough, it's choppy, it's hard to explain for a lot of people. It's hard to understand for a lot of people. But with AI, what I see in my mind for the first time in my life, I could actually show the question I intend to ask. And many of the falsehoods that are wrapped up in that question I just asked would be pointed out to me by AI, which, if I am open-minded and honestly pursuing truth, would change the nature of the question. All right. Being the nerd that I am, this is another project. Being the nerd that I am, and I love our stories. This is the greatest time in human history, in this iteration of consciousness, for human storytelling. One of the stories, or the universe of stories that I love, is Star Trek. My goal related to Star Trek isn't so much warp speed and beam me up and all this BS, what my kid calls technological magic. I love that, actually. It's a good one. But in the storyline, in all of these new Star Trek universes, is this, okay, we just had a war. We're all blown the F up. Things are really crappy. Whoa, the Vulcans landed. First contact, right? In the Prime universe, that goes pretty well. In the Mirror universe, a little bit different. But from that point on, directionality on this little ball changes. There is, illustrated in the story, 100 years of progress where we wipe out disease, we wipe out hunger, we wipe out war. I don't want the Vulcans for that. I think we can do that. I think just the fact that we can dream of it, that dream can be shared and implanted into other minds, means we could do that. When I dream of terraforming North America, I plan to have in my illustrations parameters that need to be met in order to do these illustrations. That is one of them. And I plan to follow God's inspiration, that creator God that did that 1,500-year work to give us empathy. If it doesn't pass his test, I won't use it. But to build that 100 years of peace without Vulcan first contact intervention, if you're a Trekkie, that's where I'm at. All right. What's next on the list? That's terraforming and databases. Well, it touches on terraforming and databases. See, part of the work of the illustration part of the work that is inside that work is the illustration of how to maintain databases. See, right now we have the wrong kind of power generation infrastructure for database creation, which is one of the things that is putting us behind the Chinese in our development of AI. So I have illustrations I would like to show on how databases should be built, maintained, chained, sequenced, gapped, based on a different structure to society and how we generate the energy we use, how we distribute that energy. That it's hard for me to even describe, so I'm definitely going to have to wait for AI for that. Which brings me to the really tough one. See, when you set goals for yourself, I told you, Johann said the best way to achieve flow is to select goals that are just out of reach, something you have to grow into. And you might say terraforming North America, that's big enough, you know? That's inspirational enough to work towards. But that's That's how I play when I'm doing this work. When I'm doing this work is consciousness. This work is mind. This work is growth, defining it, showing it what it means to be defined. But when I play, that's terraforming. That's terraforming North America. That's the play side of the work. But the work side of the work. See, I'm not articulate. I'm not. You know people in life or you see people that are talking heads on your devices that have gone through what I would call classical training. Dr. Jordan Peterson's a good example of this. He has been classically trained as a psychiatrist or psychologist, and he has gone through all these decades of education and peer review and the pressures that are involved in that kind of environment. He has built his mind. His organic process of consciousness has been built in such a different way, leading to such a different mind, that it's hard for me to illustrate things that way. And one of the people like him, whether he likes me saying this or not, is Richard Dawkins. That man, with that mind, he's gone through this process, this professorship, this education, the way we structure education for growth and discovery, the peer review we give to growth and discovery. And plus he's had decades to debate with fool after fool who is only religious and not in faith. I think that has jaded him. I saw him the other day. I think it was on Bill Maher's, the one where he talks at his house. That'll come to me later. I think it was there. He's like, I don't think it is possible, he says, for another human being to make the argument that would convince me that there is a God. Now, this is not uncharacteristic for Richard. He takes hardline stances. He makes decisions that are vulnerable, but vulnerable in such a way that it's not really a concern for him because he's insulated against that vulnerability. And all it takes is to be stubborn to insulate yourself. I know a lot of people like that. My dad is kind of like that. But I was kind of like that. I was once on his side for decades. Actually, I still kind of am on Richard's side. Professor Dawkins. Sorry, I don't know. But I reveled in his work, like everything from, I'm reading it again because my life has changed quite a bit since the last time I read it. And it seems like the audiobook of the book has changed so much in The God Delusion. It seems different than when I read it originally. But I still agree with a lot of the things he has to say. He has been an important influence on me my entire thinking life, and I have been an overthinker for decades. I have definitely sacrificed everything that would be success related in order to grow my mind and the data with which I have to draw on to grow it. He has grown his mind differently than I have, just like I described for Jordan Peterson, though their debate was kind of lopsided. One of my goals, but see, when I do this work, I understand that if this is how consciousness works, and if my goal is only to explain and illustrate how it works so that you can understand what it means to have been defined, then I know that there are switches inside mind that can be flipped to make extraordinary change. I know that that's true because I've witnessed it in testimonials and experienced it for myself. That is not a God delusion. So he doesn't have anything to argue with up until that point, right? I know that that is true. I recognize the value of sacrifice, and I recognize its value whether it is external to God or not, whether there is a God or not. I am an idealist. I believe in God. So he still has nothing to argue with me here yet on the topic of sacrifice. I am someone who has really treated their life foolishly. He is not. When that switch was flipped for me, the connections that were made, the understandings that was gained, it's a little bit odd English, but they were profound for someone as lowly as me. What would that effect have on someone who is that well trained, that well educated, that experienced? And I know that switch is probably impossible for me to get to. And those goals, that goal may be far harder to achieve than actually terraforming North America. But I wonder what it would be like to flip that switch in his mind. Goals. That's the whole point of this talk. How to create the environment to define a goal. How to recognize the opposition to achieving that goal. How to view the changes in your life when you sacrifice those obstacles. And how your work changes once you have. Because you don't know how you are going to change until you make that sacrifice. You don't know. I think it's crucial to have goals, especially if you want to grow, especially if you've decided who you want to be. Look at the choice I have made. I am an idealist who for years was right there with you, Richard, right there with you about how ridiculous religion is. Let me give you an example. I think you should understand and be familiar with what I'm saying. David Deutsch gave a TED Talk on good explanations. And I think you were probably even in the audience when this happened. That criteria that he gave me through the TED Talk, through the meme of his TED Talk, the meme inside that TED Talk was good explanations. And I understand that you use similar criteria for how you criticize religion. I'm right there with you. Most of this garbage is absurd and it's all human. And that's somebody who treated their life, decades of it, as a complete fool, who has come to that goal, to that understanding. I have understood, I can see. See, the problem originally when I started doing this work is I could see how it works. I couldn't explain it because I had to simplify it. But if somebody like me can make that kind of goal, it was your discovery. Memetics is your discovery. And I even think, because when I listen to you, I'm listening to the God Delusion again, as I said, and I hear you describe the God of Einstein, and I hear you identify with and sympathize with or empathize with the God of Einstein. So I know you're right there. I know you're right there. We are not far apart. I recognize with you the ridiculous nature of how human beings have been religious. And look at how the flavor of religion is changing in this world today. Because one of the most recent examples is woke. I call my channel Awakenings Are Weird, but it is anything but woke. Woke doesn't discuss this. This woke discusses what kind of fucking jeans you're wearing. It's weird. It's pointless and weird. That has nothing to do with awakenings. But understand that there are millions of people right now who are convinced they are waking up when all they're doing is subverting themselves to another religion. Look at the flavor that has changed in the memetics of human mind. And it is still just as ridiculous as it always was. I'm right there with you. I'm someone who has come to this understanding. This is what I've understood. It took me a long time to get here. And this is what I'm choosing to do with it. Because, look, I live in a world where I could take this kind of understanding and beat people's asses with it. I could just control as much as I want until I get as much as I want, and then I fall in scandal, maybe go to prison, or maybe just retire to my island. I could use this in other ways. I recognize that, and I've made the decision to go this direction. I'm using what I have and starting where I am. But imagine if that switch was flipped in you. It's important to have goals. Could you imagine? I'm 50 minutes in, right? Could you imagine if, and I'm playing, right? This is begin play. This is well after that. If the thing that changed in human mind, was that this dipshit from Wisconsin finally figured out that he had to stop some bad habits that were making him act like an idiot, was the thing that led to the flipping of that switch in your head. And it's only possible because I obsessed over memetics for decades. Anybody who has known me long enough and has actually had conversations with me will probably remember times where they were just saying something. And I said something like, oh, well, that's just memetics. And they will look at me like, what the fuck is he talking about? For decades, I was right there with you, trying to answer my own questions, trying to grow my own way. Foolishly though my way may have been, could you imagine if the thing that flipped that switch for you was this dumbass from Wisconsin that just decided, hey, it's time to quit gambling? I know that in your current mind, you could classify that as just simple, well, that's just memetics. But I am an idealist in the true mind before matter way. For me, that's not just memetics. There's external forces acting on us. Hell, if I could flip that switch for you, that is more of a miracle than terraforming North America. That's my peak goal. And it's probably impossible. It is definitely more than the Johan Hari's just out of reach, you know? It's more than that. It's probably unrealistic. But so is terraforming North America. And really, if you're going to set goals, if you're going to figure out and understand who you are, big goals are nice. Big goals give you directionality to your growth. I think that's crucial. Thank you for your time.